This is a series on CSS Maximizer. Now, the idea of this is to basically create dynamic CSS, but make it just as powerful and fast and optimized as any CSS script you could write statically. So, there's a lot of CSS frameworks for achieving certain things, like possibly dealing with CSS in a dynamic way, caching CSS, working towards a certain grid size, dynamic heights so that you don't have to set them, you just nest columns. And there's obviously this thing with CSS3 and HTML5 where you can use them in certain browsers or instead go to a JavaScript or Flash fallback. So the best ideas or the best frameworks and what they achieve best from their own thing, decided to combine the best 5 into one central framework, which is the Maximizer framework. Well, it's not specifically a framework, it's just a collection of these 5 frameworks, but so that they work together to achieve basically a very powerful CSS framework that's easy to modify. It's as efficient as possible and as fast as possible, and obviously gives you all the new standards you can achieve. So this new maximized framework will consist of these 5 frameworks that I've got in these tabs, which is Modernizer, 52 framework, Elastis, XCSS, and Baseline. So first one is Modernizer. Modernizer is basically a way of writing CSS for, well, writing CSS classes specifically for browsers that support certain CSS3 and HTML5 properties. So this obviously saves you the hassle of digging yourself into a bit of a problem with the amount of different code you have to write and separate in CSS for all the different browsers. So this just covers them all for late stuff and has fallbacks. Although it's mainly for actually all around on the fallback thing, it's mainly for checking. It allows you to do stuff, but it doesn't actually have any kind of native fallbacks. That's for another framework to fill in. So Modernizer is just basically HTML5 and CSS3 checkers, and it'll just allow you to work around them much easier in a much more kind of makes sense way. So the next one's 52 framework. Now this one is the fallback framework, which allows you to, it'll have the best CSS to use for elements that do support CSS3 and HTML5, and it'll have fallbacks built in as well. So this framework combined with Modernizer just covers all CSS and HTML5, making your website fit. So it basically it uses it if it's needed, and you've got the possibility to use it. But if not, you can always fall back to JavaScript. So the next framework is Elastis, which is basically, it's a CSS framework, which means you don't have to specifically worry about widths and heights all the time. You can just wrap everything in containers and columns, and it'll automatically fit to the percent of the screen you apply. Well, not percent. Just at any amount of area you need. Normally it'll just fill the whole screen. But you'll always have perfectly sized elements. So you can have a 3-column layout with one column having 2 more columns inside of it, and then one column having 2 columns inside of that while the other one doesn't. And it just kind of builds on that idea. That you don't actually have to write any CSS for that to work, you just include the file. So obviously this combined with 52 and Modernizer just gives you the ability to not have to worry about widths and heights. All you have to worry about is just the style specifically. XCSS is a very important one for making your CSS efficient and fast. Because the problem with it's not a problem with HTML as much, because not many people write static HTML anymore. They're always using some kind of framework or some kind of content management system, which automatically writes HTML to be as efficient and strict as possible. But with CSS, there's a lot of problems with repeating yourself. DIY stands for don't repeat yourself. Because obviously, you know how you want each element, but it'd take a lot of time for any design to basically write the CSS so the file's as small as possible and kind of share around copied attributes, etc. So the idea of this is object-orientated CSS, where you can just basically include CSS from different classes, combine them, cache CSS, and include property variables to kind of share around. You can see down here. So XCSS is going to do most of the stuff in this framework in terms of making it speeded up and more efficient. And it's just going to compile the CSS into the best possible CSS file we can get, and combine with the other ones. We'll obviously have more than one compiled CSS file, depending on how many different browsers and resolution, etc. But all those will be automatically made on the fly, and then cached, so there's no technical work needs to be done to load them each time. The last one is baseline. Although baseline is a bit of a different concept, because it's just baseline is about getting it pixel perfect, specifically with text. But with the other frameworks built around this, you can exploit baseline by just making the other frameworks generate the sizes for you and the best areas to fit in, and then using baseline to just tamper with the size specifically inside the elements and give you a default layout and grid to mess around with. So all five together, and with a few small changes and extras thrown in, and some other optimizations, you can basically just write a normal HTML or PHP, whatever, site, and through these frameworks write what you want to achieve with less lines, and all together you'll get the best CSS directed against new standards, falling back to old standards, fitting pretty much any resolution to best possible what you can achieve from that resolution, and with all the flexibility that you get from using dynamic sizes and CSS. So that's just the introduction to the 5 frameworks and what we're trying to achieve. I'll go through each individual framework and show what they do, and then I'll just basically show what each one does, and then show it all forming together and how you'd deploy them all as one. So that's the end of this tutorial. In the second part, I'm going to be covering Elastis and doing just dynamic things with that, which uses JavaScript and CSS as a workaround. So check that out.